could alert the police.
We know that at certain points we've been